All these movies had their moments. They made some smart moves, played the game, took home the gold. But in 2025, they're looking less like Oscar winners and more like golden raspberries. This is the cinematic equivalent of that well-meaning grandma who still thinks it's cute to pinch people's cheeks at parties. Driving Miss Daisy cleaned up at the Oscars. Best Picture, Best Actress for Jessica Tandy, the whole deal. And sure, it's a polished, feel-good movie about an unlikely friendship. But in 2025 feels a little off. Morgan Freeman plays Hoke, the ever-patient black chauffeur, to a condescending Miss Daisy. It's a well-intentioned story about race, but it leans hard into this tired trope, where black characters exist just to help white characters grow. That kind of storytelling didn't age well. What might have felt progressive back then just doesn't hold up now. Audiences expect more. No, not the Cronenberg's one about people who get off on car accidents. This is the crash that came out of nowhere and snatched Best Picture from Brokeback Mountain. Back in 2004, it felt timely. A big, all-star drama tackling racial tensions in post-9/11 LA. But now, feels way too heavy-handed. Every character is basically a walking stereotype, their prejudices spelled out in bold, their redemption arcs tied up with a neat little bow. The movie wants to say something deep about racism, but ends up doing the bare minimum. This is the cinematic equivalent of that one guy who thinks retweeting a social justice post makes him an activist. Means well, but misses the mark. At the time, American Beauty hit like a sledgehammer. Middle-aged guys in midlife crises ate it up. Suburban disillusionment was the theme of the moment, and this movie cleaned up at the Oscars. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Kevin Spacey, the whole deal. Fast forward to now, and it doesn't hold up the way it used to. The cracks are obvious. Lester creeping on his daughter's teenage friend feels way less like some grand awakening and way more like plain creepy. And it's not just that. It leans so hard into the older man, younger woman trope that it's tough to buy as a critique of suburban emptiness. Then you throw in everything that's come out about Spacey since, and American Beauty aged worse than those roses. You know that uneasy feeling when you find out your favorite childhood story has some seriously problematic undertones? That's pretty much how modern viewers feel about The Birth of a Nation. Despite being groundbreaking in its filmmaking techniques, and being one of John Ford's favorite films apparently, it is notoriously known for glorifying the Ku Klux Klan and promoting white supremacy. Sure, it was a different era, and it didn't win an Oscar as they didn't exist until 1929, but it was retrospectively acknowledged as one of the best films of the silent era. But any film that presents the Ku Klux Klan as heroic vigilantes isn't going to age well. Gone with the Wind is basically that old relative who won't stop talking about the good old days. A massive hit in 1939, cleaned up at the Oscars, broke records, had insane production value. It was a huge deal. But that romanticized take on the Old South, that part didn't age so well. The performances, still incredible. The love story, still iconic. But the way it glosses over slavery and paints the antebellum South as some lost paradise feels tone-deaf at best, offensive at worst. Like Scarlett O'Hara clinging to Ashley, Gone with the Wind is holding on to something that should have been left behind a long time ago. Dances with Wolves was the cinematic equivalent of eating kale before it was cool. It was a big deal back then, but it hasn't aged well. Kevin Costner's film tells the story of a Union Army lieutenant who befriends a tribe of Lakota Indians. While it was a hit in 1990, bagging 7 Oscars including Best Picture, the film's portrayal of Native Americans through a white perspective now feels outdated. Moreover, the trope of the white savior comes off as condescending in today's context. I know, Forrest Gump is an absolute darling, and it won a whopping 6 Oscars, including Best Picture. But here's the thing, it's like a charming friend who never seems to grow up. Sure, Tom Hanks's performance as the slow-witted but kind-hearted Forrest is endearing, but the film's oversimplified narrative feels rather insubstantial. The movie's take on historical events through the lens of an intellectually disabled man borders on the simplistic, and its treatment of Jenny's character, the troubled love interest, is questionable at best. You know that one friend who gets a vintage record player and suddenly won't shut up about the authenticity of vinyl sound? The artist is the film equivalent of that friend. This silent black and white film, a homage to the bygone era of Hollywood, won a surprising 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. However, in retrospect, its silent shtick feels more like a gimmick than an essential narrative choice. The artist is like a beautifully wrapped gift that, upon opening, turns out to be socks. It's nice, it's functional, but you can't help but feel a little disappointed. Remember when everyone loved those biopics about brilliant individuals overcoming adversity? Well, A Beautiful Mind was the king of that particular hill, winning 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. The film tells the story of John Nash, a mathematical genius struggling with schizophrenia. While Russell Crowe's performance is commendable, the film's treatment of mental illness is problematic, romanticizing and oversimplifying the complexity of schizophrenia. Additionally, the film has been criticized for whitewashing some aspects of Nash's life. It means well, but falls short in its execution. And finally, we arrive at Green Book. Controversial from the start, and somehow, it still walked away with Best Picture just 7 years ago. The movie's about an unlikely friendship between Don Shirley, a black classical pianist, played by Mahershala Ali, and his Italian-American driver Tony, played by Viggo Mortensen. The problem is, the whole thing leans way too hard on cliches, feels like a white savior story, and it's all filtered through Tony's perspective, like someone tried to explain racism with a bunch of post-it notes. Movies age fast when audiences start looking at them through a different lens, and this one didn't hold up.